Orion Pest Control, case number 5. The mechanic gave me a ride. The infected deer are starting to become a real problem. That being said, as the title suggests, the worms are the least of my worries. On my drive home a few nights ago, I saw the reflection of eyes in the distance. As I slowed down, I discovered a buck standing in the middle of the road, head bent over, gray fur. It was eating a possum. Or more accurately, the worms puppeteering it were coiling around the possum, their mouths leaving huge holes in the poor animal's fur as they dragged it between the deer's open jaws. Like the infected doe I had encountered before, the buck's stomach was pulsating as the worms moved. Its fur was unruly, the white patch over its throat stained with layers of dried blood. My stomach fluttered in disgust at the way the parasites protruded from its mouth. God, those worms. Steeling myself, I snatched my tool belt off the passenger seat along with the shotgun and went to take care of it. Unfortunately, I only had regular shells that time. After the incident at the farm, I hadn't had time to restock on salt shells. They would have made this process much faster and easier. I just had to shoot it in the head, then pour salt on each worm afterwards. Same as before. No problem, right? The sounds that the worms made as they devoured the opossum made my skin crawl. The sliminess of their skin as they slithered around each other, combined with the wet tearing of flesh and fur. Whatever you're imagining, I assure you that the noise was far more nauseating in real life. Before the worms or their host had a chance to notice me, I took aim and pulled the trigger. The side of the buck's head exploded. It let out a deep, guttural groan as the worms dropped from around the trapped rodent. The buck then lowered its antlers at me. Fuck, 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 fuck! I sprinted for my car as it charged me, the worms flopping around as they were dragged across the road by their host. I got out of the way just as the buck's antlers pierced my G6's hood. It shook its head violently, my little car shaking along with it as it tried to get its antlers free. Why was it so much more aggressive than the doe? Had it been infected longer? Just as I raised the shotgun again, I felt something brush against my foot. I was so glad that nobody was around to see me yelp like a coyote as I expertly flailed away from the worm that had taste-tested my boot. There was an ear-splitting, metallic groan as the buck got its antlers free. I stepped away from the worms as I fired again. The buck fell to the side, causing the worms to lurch on the ground like cut ropes. Heroically, I backed away from them even more as they began to convulse, fumbling with shaking hands to get the salt out of my tool belt. The area around me became much brighter as another vehicle made its way down the road. I got off to the side to lower the chances of getting hit, then otherwise ignored it as I finished the job by seasoning the parasites, grimacing as they writhed against their salty demise. From behind me, I heard the oncoming vehicle start to slow down. I had just finished salting the final worm when the driver completely slowed to a stop. Glaring against the headlights, dread pooled in my stomach as I recognized the old boxy blue Ford pickup. I'd seen it parked at the mechanic's shop every time I had to go over there. What was he doing here? Coincidences don't exist in this line of work. I hadn't seen the mechanic since the day he turned me into a dog. I went out of my way to try to avoid him, which in hindsight, I probably could have been more subtle about. It occurred to me to run, a frightened, primal impulse. But if I'm right about what the mechanic is, that'd be a horrible idea. They take cruel delight in hunting their prey down. Not knowing what else to do as my heart raced, I made sure that the buck and the worms were dead, shooting the infected animal in the head one last time. It didn't move. Neither did the worms. The truck's door creaked open, then slammed shut, and with the sound of his boots on the gravel, I said a quick prayer, hoping that whatever God heard me would be a merciful one. The mechanic grimaced at the worms. Whew! Those things are nasty. All I could think of to say in my state was, yeah, brilliant, right? He clicked his tongue and walked over to my G6, shaking his head. It sure did a number on this. For the first time, I got to see the extent of the damage that the buck had done to my poor little car. The hood was crumpled and riddled with several small holes. I had left it running, but after the attack, the engine had gone quiet. My dread worsened as I noticed that some sort of fluid was pooling beneath the front of the car. The mechanic popped the hood, absent-mindedly nudging a dead worm out of the way with his heel as he examined my suffering car. Yep, that's the fucking radiator, the mechanic commented. This thing ain't going anywhere. You've got to be kidding me. I'm not a car person. I didn't know if he was messing with me or not. I stammered. Are you serious? He closed my hood. You see me laughing, puppy dog? Prick. Please don't call me that, I said, keeping my voice as even as possible. He snickered. What would you like me to call you then? I replied. Let's go back to stranger. He pursed his lips. But we're really not strangers anymore, now are we? I didn't like that he'd taken enough of an interest in me to want to use something other than a generic nickname for me. I didn't trust this, not one bit. The mechanic patted the G6 hoods noisily before stepping over a worm to stand in front of me. Well, I can tow this thing to the shop, then start working on it in the morning. In the meantime, why don't you let me give you a lift? Oh, fuck no. Thanks, but I have people I can call, I replied, eyes on his chest to avoid his gaze. He chuckled. You really don't like accepting help when it's offered, do you? That was a warning. Don't push it. Doing everything in my power to keep my voice calm, I asked, Will you expect something in return? With a grin, he replied, Just a pleasure of your company. I don't like this. As much as I would have preferred to take my chances walking home and dealing with literally any other atypical animal that could be prowling the night, I was too afraid to wear the mechanic's patience any thinner. He either read my mind or my thoughts showed on my face, because then he added with a smirk, You can bring your gun. That'll make you feel safer. Unable to shake the feeling that I was going to the gallows, I reluctantly climbed to the passenger seat of his truck, flipping the safety switch on the shotgun before setting it on the floor against my leg. The interior smelled pleasantly of black cherries. I'd expected the stench of motor oil. He wordlessly navigated the truck in front of my broken-down car, then jumped back out again to hook everything up. While he was busy with that, I quickly texted Victor and Raina. Broke down. Mechanic found me, taking me somewhere, not sure where yet. For good measure, I also shared my location with them. Afterwards, I jammed my phone back into my pocket, then peered in the side mirror to watch the mechanic. He was pulling on the chains he'd attached to my G6, testing their tightness. He looked like he was almost done. My phone buzzed, but I didn't dare take it out again. The mechanic climbed back into the driver's seat with a sigh as the old pickup started down the road. My unease kept building. I felt like I shouldn't move or breathe too much. For some strange reason, this might sound dramatic, but I would have felt safer being trapped in a cage with a hungry lion. At least the lion would just shred me and be done with it. I reminded myself that I was still wearing my tool belt. He'd let me take the shotgun. I didn't know how effective salt, shells, or a silver blade would be against him, but it was slightly reassuring to know that I wasn't completely defenseless. Just slightly. The fact that he let me keep all of it told me that he didn't consider me a threat to him, even while armed. The mechanic glanced at me. I don't know about you, but I'm starving. I was on my way to Dylan's when I found you. Dylan's is an old 50s style diner that's about a half-hour walk away from where my apartment is. It's cheap, greasy, and gets the job done, especially when you're hungover. The mechanic looked and sounded deceptively friendly as he spoke again. Though I am glad we ran into each other, there's something I've been wanting to discuss with you. That can't be good. I stared through the windshield, only looking over at him occasionally to avoid any possibility of him catching my eye. The mechanic continued. You remember when I told you the other night that you impressed me? I meant that, and humans don't normally impress me so much. So, make of that what you will. However, you also tried to get smart with me, and that is the shit I hate. You can be as polite as you want, but insolence is insolence, no matter how much you try to sugarcoat it. Even though his tone remained light, the nervous pit in my stomach grew into a gaping chasm. Was he still angry? And if he was, what did that mean for me? The mechanic side-eyed me briefly, as if he expected me to say something. My phone buzzed in my pocket again. One of my coworkers tried to call me. Another thing yins need to know about dealing with the neighbors. Never use the words, I'm sorry. The reason being that an apology is an admission of debt to them. If you have to atone for a transgression, and it's highly recommended that you do so, your phrasing matters. I hope that humbling myself would appease him. My actions were a waste of your time, and I absolutely regret them. It won't happen again. The mechanic snickered. See, that's just it. You're so, fuck, what's the word I'm looking for? I heard it just the other day and it reminded me of you. Oh, right. Uncutus. You ever heard that word before? Uncutus. You ever heard that word before? I told him I hadn't. It means someone who is insincerely polite. They'll tell you what you want to hear just to get what they want. Sound familiar, pup? He'd never been this ruthless in our interactions before. I needed to be careful. Feeling my mouth get dry from impending panic, I shook my head. That's not it. I just try to watch what I say. I don't mean for it to come off as disingenuous. Throughout this whole conversation, his smile stayed in place. He was enjoying making me squirm, as much as it killed me to give him that satisfaction. I couldn't hide it. Even without that banjo around, I was terrified of him. He replied, You can see why I'm glad we ran into each other. There's something that's been on my mind for a bit. Could have gotten it out of the way a whole lot sooner, if you hadn't been hiding from me. I knew better than to insist that I wasn't avoiding him, especially since I was already on dangerously thin ice, and we were still far enough away from town that if he were to decide to pull over right there and then, no one would notice what happened to me until it was too late. Swallowing back my nervousness, I asked, What happens now? Well, that whole nasty business 2 weeks ago didn't need to happen. All you had to do was find your boss, which you already wanted to do anyway. But instead, you decided to be a smartass. From now on, don't get smart with me and just do your job. That ain't asking for too much, is it? Trying to get more saliva in my dry mouth to swallow again, I hurriedly nodded. No, it's not. I'll do better. Glad we're understanding each other, pup. Despite the mechanic's relaxed demeanor, I still didn't feel safe in that truck. We were getting closer to town. My phone didn't stop vibrating. I just hoped that he was taking me where he said we were going. There's a bit of conflict in our records as to whether or not the neighbors can lie. Some sources state that they can only speak the truth. Others say that they're able to just be as dishonest as humans. Either way, it's best to operate under the assumption that their intentions are to manipulate. The mechanic then cheerily asked, Well, now that we got that unpleasantness out of the way, I gotta know, how'd you get so good with a gun? I've seen old Blue Eyes can shoot, and that man can't hit the broadside of a barn, so I know he ain't the one that taught you. Military records are public. If he learned even something as minuscule as my last name, it wouldn't be hard to identify me or my mom from there. The neighbors have been known to seek out the family members of those who've slighted them. Entire bloodlines have been destroyed in this manner. I've seen it happen before, but that's a story for another time. I can't stress this enough. Never let a neighbor learn your name. I'm being vague enough to protect myself, but detailed enough to satisfy him. I wanted to learn how to defend myself when I was younger, so I found some good teachers. I must have missed the mark, because the mechanic shook his head and chuckled. You're doing it again, that annoying indirect shit. Why don't you try giving me a real answer for once? Feeling my heart flutter, I muttered, armed forces. That was still vague. I didn't specify which of the armed forces. He could deduce when I served based on my age, but even then, that was still thousands of soldiers to sort through. Hopefully that would be enough to protect us. Well, thank you for your service, he said, his tone slightly mocking. He could taunt me as much as he wanted. At least he accepted that answer. I just hoped I wouldn't face any repercussions for being too vague earlier. More streetlights were appearing. We were in town, getting closer to Dylan's, assuming that he had been telling the truth about our destination. This was the longest drive of my life. If the truck hadn't been going fast, I would have been tempted to tuck and roll. And again, if the mechanic is what I think he is, he'd probably love it if I gave him the opportunity to chase me. I had to know for sure, though, just so that I knew how to properly deal with him. Doing my best to sound meek, not hard at the moment, I tried to word my question carefully. Are you a wild huntsman? Once again, not taking a risk of typing or saying the S word, especially since I haven't heard from that one person that commented on that term on my last post. Speaking of, are you still alive and in one piece, holiday space? The mechanic laughed. Too afraid to say it, huh? Come on, I dare you. No thanks. One of you is bad enough. I don't need any of your hunting buddies to show up. The mechanic shook his head at me as he snickered. Coward. Up ahead was Dylan's old purple neon sign. To my relief, the mechanic pulled into the parking lot. With it being so late, there were only 2 vehicles there, besides the mechanic's tow truck, not including my comatose G6. Anxious to get out of there, I reached for the handle, only for the door to swing open before I could grab it. The mechanic was holding the door open for me. I hadn't even heard the driver's side open. See why I didn't try to run from him? It took a lot of effort to sound sincere as I said, "What a gentleman." He nodded towards Dylan. After you. Even though the idea of having to spend more quality time with the mechanic made me want to crawl out of my skin, I felt marginally safer in public. He wouldn't risk exposing himself when he has a shop to run. At least I didn't think he would. The girl that seated us blushed the moment she saw him. For her sake, I hope he doesn't ever decide to take advantage of her crush. I was so keyed up that food was the last thing on my mind. It took our poor, flustered waitress asking me twice before I could order only a glass of water. After she walked away, the mechanic leaned forward, forearms resting on the table as he said in a low voice, "You know you don't have to act like a hostage, right?" Wasn't I, though? He did take me there against my will, after all. I whispered, "Why am I here? What else do you want?" "I already told you. I want your company. We're just talking, that's it." If that was true, then why go through the effort of intimidating me? Granted, he didn't have to do much, My mind raced as I tried to remember anything helpful that my boss could have told me. I recalled that Victor had said that the mechanic couldn't do anything to him while he was still alive. There must be some sort of condition that has to be met. The waitress scurried over with the mechanic's coffee and my water, turning an even deeper shade of red when the mechanic flashed an admittedly charming smile at her. When her eyes met mine, she looked somewhat embarrassed. It occurred to me that to someone on the outside of all this atypical nonsense, it probably looked like I was an extremely anxious and somewhat disheveled date. Christ, just kill me. Now that I had humiliation to add on top of all the other negative emotions I was experiencing, I sipped at the metallic-tasting ice water, grateful to give my parched tongue some relief. As the mechanic added at least 10 sugar packets to his coffee, he said, "Try to relax a little, all right? If I'd wanted to hurt you, I could have taken care of that out on the road." Was that supposed to be reassuring? After a deep breath, trying to lessen my nerves, I uttered, "You want a little coffee with your sugar?" He snorted. "Judge me all you want. It's like a drinkable candy bar." I stared down at my paper placemat that doubled as a menu. The last thing I wanted was to meet his gaze. It was harder to avoid it when seated together in a small booth. In retrospect, I think that's what he was counting on. He said something alarming about Victor that made me reflectively glance up in shock, aiming to look just at his chest again. I don't even remember what he'd said. The phone ringing in the kitchen. Mom kneeling down to hug me, making my shoulder wet. My father glaring at me through bulletproof glass. I shook my head, blinking. What? Fingertips on my chin, leaning in as if to kiss me. The mechanic's eyes are hazel. Our garage spray-painted murderer, a fist pummeling my nose in the school hallway. My black mitten massé trotting towards me. That recruiter's shit-eating grin. Sergeant Wilcox screaming, "Come on, you useless fucks!" Yelling for a medic as I held my hand over Oliver's bleeding stomach. Wait, what happened? A warm gloved hand over my eyes. My cheeks were wet. When did I start crying? As I came to my senses, I recognized Raina's perfume. The mechanic's voice made me stiffen. Its tone was sultry, with a menacing edge to it. "And who might you be?" "No one," she replied hurriedly, her voice bearing a slight quiver. Then she whispered to me, "Let's go." Even though I couldn't see him, I could tell the mechanic was smiling as he told us that he'd see us later. Due to our height difference, I'm 6'1", while Raina meets the requirements for the Lollipop Guild. Her hand uncovered my face naturally as I stood up to leave. I refused to look in the mechanic's general direction. We rushed out. I could tell he was watching to see which car we'd go into. Fortunately, Raina had the foresight to park behind the building. I should also mention that Raina had disguised herself. She wore a red, heart-shaped sunglasses and a scarf over her head, like a starlet from the golden age of Hollywood. She even wore platforms to try to appear taller. While it wasn't very discreet, it would hopefully keep the mechanic from recognizing her. Once we got to her Monte Carlo and peeled out, she ripped the sunglasses off. Glancing into the rearview mirror for what felt like the 8th time as Dylan's faded away behind us. Raina frantically asked, "What did he do to you? I walked in and you were just..." He'd flipped through my mind like the pages of a book. I told her as much. She asked me if I was okay. I wasn't sure. "We're going to my place," she informed me, checking the mirror again. Vic and I agreed it's probably the safest since the mechanic knows the least about me, and I'd love to keep it that way. I nodded, still unreeling from having my memories dug into. "Sounds good." Further on down the road, she noticeably stiffened when she saw a pair of headlights come up behind us. I reminded her that he didn't know what her car looked like. She didn't speed up, keeping the car at the speed limit to not draw attention to ourselves. As the headlights got closer, turns out it was just some impatient idiot with a lifted Dodge Ram truck. We both let out groans of relief when the ugly, oversized vehicle passed us. I never thought I'd actually be glad to see a pavement princess, Raina commented with a nervous laugh. Then suddenly she asked, Is the mechanic an incubus? Feeling the beginning of a headache behind my left eye, I answered, I wish. I'd be a lot simpler. Ah, okay. Wonderful. Lovely. And, don't worry about answering anything else, I say. I'm just kind of talking because I don't know what else to do. So if you want to ignore me, feel free. I ended up calling Victor, putting him on loudspeaker so that Raina could hear. He answered on the first ring. What happened? Are you all right? I caught him up on everything. After I was done, he sighed. Okay, if you don't mind me asking, when he got into your head, what did he see? My sperm donor getting arrested, me getting beaten up in middle school, boot camp, and a buddy dying after an ambush in Afghanistan. Was your name used in any of those memories? No. Okay, that's good at least. I'm sorry you were forced to relive all that. I didn't know what to say. Thankfully, Victor saved me from having to respond by continuing. I was afraid of this. When a hunter takes an interest in someone, especially someone they can't take right away, they start off trying to break the target down, using fear and intimidation to make the person feel isolated, sometimes even driving them insane. The mechanic is trying to start that process with you. What he was saying checked out with everything that I'd researched about the hunt. They are said to be attracted to bereavement, often pursuing those who've experienced a great loss or heartbreak. They interpret it as weakness. The more vulnerable their victim is, the easier it is for the hunt to devour them. That explained why the mechanic had gravitated towards some of the most traumatic experiences of my life. I'd read somewhere that they find brave, good-natured people especially appetizing, even though they're the hardest for the hunt to take. By being unable to cry out when I was transformed, I think I'd unintentionally convinced the mechanic that I was that type of person, and it made him hungry. Victor bitterly informed us. He's not going to chase you tonight. He has your gun and your car. He knows you'll go to him. Slowly, fear became replaced with anger and spite. The mechanic could disarm me and use my worst moments against me. But I resolved then that I wouldn't let that fucker intimidate me. I wouldn't give him what he wanted. If he wanted to think I was something special, I'd give him something fucking special. Vic, can you get her things so that she doesn't have to deal with him? Raina asked. Before he could answer, I shook my head. No, I don't want the mechanic to think that I'm afraid. I mean, I am, but he doesn't need to know that. Victor warned. By confronting him, you could make the hunt more thrilling for him. That might encourage him to be more aggressive towards you. I shrugged. I'm screwed either way. At least this way, I'm screwed on my own terms. For the first time in a long time, Victor sounded like he might have been smiling. I haven't seen him smile since before he showed up with that bandana covering his slit throat. We can start by finding a hagstone. It's easier said than done. But something's telling me that there'll be one at Beaver Run. Check there. According to our records, Draugr have limited ability to see the future. Maybe that strange feeling was actually a premonition. It certainly wouldn't hurt to check. Tomorrow morning, while the mechanic is at his shop, it's hagstone time, I announced. I'll help, Raina offered, but then quickly added, unless you need me to cover for her tomorrow, Vic. If you wouldn't mind doing a half day, that'd be best. Okay, can do. Victor wished us luck, then hung up. Forgive me, I'm going to go off on a brief tangent. Raina has a pet skunk. Her name is Fireball. I'm mentioning this because that little skunk was basically free therapy after the night I'd had. And in all my days of having to dig little guys out from under people's houses, I've never really had the chance to appreciate how cute they are. She can't spray, Raina assured me when the little critter trotted over to sniff me. For those that aren't aware, skunks are typically quiet, but when they do vocalize, they sound like weed whackers. Raina stared down at Fireball. What are you meeping at? Fireball stomped at her, then jumped back. In the wild, they do this when they're trying to intimidate predators. So if you encounter a skunk and they do this, it's best to back off. However, in Fireball's case, they might also stomp when they're feeling sassy. Raina put up her hands in an annoyed gesture. What's with the attitude? The skunk stomped again. Raina huffed. Jeez, you act like you're starving to death. You still have food in your bowl, idiot. Just because you can see a little bit on the bottom doesn't mean it's empty. After we quadruple checked to make sure that every entrance into Raina's apartment was properly salted, I settled down on the couch to get some sleep. At one point in the night, Fireball ended up curled up in my lap. That healed me. The search for a hagstone wasn't going to be an easy one. They're stones with holes in the middle, normally found near bodies of water. In the old tales, these stones were valuable tools against the neighbors for a variety of reasons. One of them being they can protect against curses and ward off evil. There also have been said to allow humans to see things that would normally be hidden to us when looking through the middle of the stone. In other words, if our records were accurate, and it was the key. If our records were accurate, it was the key to leveling the playing field when it came to the mechanic. I was in the river not long after the sun rose. Even though the water was cold this early in the summer, my spite kept me warm. I dug through the riverbed for hours until I came across a white stone with a large hole in its lumpy center. Good thing knowing that Victor's newfound Dragura intuition was accurate. I have the hagstone hanging on a chain around my neck tucked under my shirt. I wasn't sure what effect the hagstone would have on the mechanic. At the very least, maybe I could see what he actually looked like. Later that afternoon, Victor called to tell me that my car was done. Moment of truth. Even with the hagstone, I wasn't looking forward to being in close quarters with the mechanic again. But I reminded myself that I wasn't going to let that sadistic fuck frighten me into hiding again. No more avoiding him. The mechanic greeted me with a boyish grin in place. Long time no see, pup. Feeling the weight of the hagstone as a comforting weight around my neck, I said, I was told my car is done. I think I left my shotgun in your truck as well. You did. You left in such a hurry. Probably had a lot on your mind, I imagine. Fuck you. He set my keys on the counter along with my shotgun, then leaned forward, resting his forearms on the counter next to him. Come and get him. I didn't know if the hagstone would keep him out of my head, and I wasn't about to find out the hard way. He already knew more about me than I was comfortable with. I kept my eyes low. As I approached the counter, he suddenly stepped back, eyes narrowed. Unfortunately, he didn't lose that grin. That was a shame. I was hoping to wipe it off his face. That was a shame. I was hoping to wipe it off his face. The mechanic let out a short laugh. I see you came prepared. I sounded braver than I felt. Of course I did. Now, how much for the repairs? His smile turned mysterious as he gave me my total. He didn't come closer to the counter while I stood by it. I had to back up for him to be able to run my card, a preloaded debit card that I kept putting cash onto specifically for reasons like this. After that was done, he set it on the counter next to my other belongings, leaning against the back of some old clunker he had lined up to work on. As I hurried to get my things, the mechanic suddenly said, You can't tell me that you ain't curious. Curious about what? About what I really look like. He smirked, folding his arms across his chest. Go on, take a peek. As tempting as it wasn't hard to deduce his ulterior motive. You just want to know where I have the stone hidden. He chuckled. Yeah, that's true. You got me there. But wouldn't you like to know what you're dealing with? Yeah, you got me. He chuckled. Yep, that's true. You got me there. But wouldn't you like to know what you're really dealing with? I already do. I don't need to see a monster to know it's there. Judging by the way his eyes slitted, he did not care for that comment. I knew I was probably going to regret that later. He already wanted to hunt me for sport. What did it matter if I clapped back at him just one time? His voice lowered. When your heart stops, puppy dog, you better pray the devil finds you before I do. You'll crave hell before I'm done with you. Hoping that he couldn't see my hand shaking, I grabbed my things to go out without another word. The G6 was working even better than it had the night before the deer incident. After that interaction, I think I'm going to look for more hagstones, and I think I'm going to restock on more salt shells. Update. I did exactly that. Hey, this is Jay Taylor from Dante's Disciple. I have been missing in action for sure. I ended up having my wisdom teeth taken out, and in the process of getting my wisdom tooth taken out, they cracked one of my molars. That, in combination with grading papers for 5th and 6th grade English, kept me pretty busy. I'm going to try to keep the season going regularly, or the series going regularly as much as I can. I want to thank everyone for listening, and as usual, I appreciate the likes and the subs. Slowly growing this channel is my one joy amongst my busy life, so I really appreciate getting to read to you. And I'd also like to send a shout out to Adorable Tapeworm for writing such an amazing series. Thank you, my disciples. I look forward to reading to you again soon.